Miami Dolphins hosted a surprising free agent visit on Monday. We're going to touch base on that and plenty more here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, couple of names I would be calling on if I were Chris Grier. We've started to see some trades across the league this week. As of yesterday, we had two on Sunday. We also have a familiar face going elsewhere in Xavien Howard on the move. He will play his first career game for a team that's not the Dolphins against the Dolphins in week 1 for the Indianapolis Colts. But we start with the news that the Dolphins are hosting Matthew Judon for a free agent visit today. Now, it's 3 p.m. Transactions for the day usually get announced at 4 p.m. There's a decent chance that this is something that materializes and happens. That's been the reporting from Aaron Wilson, who's one of the NFL insiders that's got a pretty good track record, is barring anything unforeseen, there's an expectation that these two sides are motivated to agree to terms and strike a deal with one another. What does this mean? If I told you that the Dolphins were going to host a free agent visit, you probably would have assumed it would have been a defensive back, right? But I think the first and most important thing to note is that Mike McDaniel on Monday said that this was not about any pre-existing injury issues with any of the names in-house. So this is not, Jalen Phillips and his leg bruise is some extreme thing that's not going to go away. This is not, Chop Robinson really broke his ribs with the rib thing that he had in the joint practice against Detroit, and he's going to miss a lot of it's nothing like that. And I think back to the start of free agency when we knew it was going to be Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb and Chop Robinson. The Dolphins showed interest going all the way back to free agency in signing Joey Bosa. Now, Bosa ends up landing in Buffalo on an incentive-laden deal that lands, it was more than $10 million was the max value of that contract. I think it was 14. So Miami, going all the way back to March, had eyes on another edge rusher to potentially add to their ranks. And when you think of that interest that existed, and now you fast forward to August 18th, and the Bosa thing obviously didn't happen. You gave the young guys a chance where you had Muhammad Kamara as a 5th-round draft choice, and he missed the whole trip to Chicago and Detroit because he's in concussion protocol. And you have Quentin Bell, who was a player who fortified a sturdy role for you last year as a special teams guy and an early down guy. And Cam Good is a former draft pick. None of those guys, it would seem, at least as of today, August 18th, as I've watched the film through 2 preseason games, have made the leap to make you feel like, hey, we have a 4th pass rusher that we feel good about. I think that's probably a fair statement to say. Now, I also think it's fair to say whether, you had Quentin Bell as the 5th guy and he's a special teams guy who could play early downs, and then you had Willie Gay and he can blur the lines for you a little bit. I don't think anybody was saying, hey, we're really hurting for pass rush here. But you do acknowledge the injury risk that exists with Bradley Chubb, and you acknowledge the injury risk that exists with Jalen Phillips based off of their track records. And if you wanted to protect yourself and make sure this strength stays a strength, a veteran player like a Matthew Judon, I think you could do a heck of a whole lot worse than. And I don't think Judon at this stage of this game is anywhere near the best version of himself as a player. He's never been the most explosive player. He's a super cerebral pass rusher. I think that's really where he shines and wins the most as far as setting up guys and having pass rush plans. But your second edge rusher for the majority of the year last year was Emmanuel Ogbah. Like, Ogbah took 700 snaps for you last year. And I would say Judon right now is a better pass rusher than Emmanuel Ogbah is. And I think he's got a little bit more juice than what Emmanuel Ogbah does. So if your compensation is, hey, your edge 4 this year, if you end up signing Matthew Judon, is better than what I think your edge 2 was last year for 3/4 of the season in Emmanuel Ogbah, I think you'd feel really good about that domino. And I know everybody's question is, well, what does this mean for, we still have all these concerns that exist with the cornerback room and the tight end room and potentially is the 4th offensive tackle. And I get it, and what I would expect is you're starting to see across the league, it's waking up. Vets that didn't want to take part in training camp, they're signing contracts, they're joining teams, and they've got 3.5 weeks before the season starts. You're seeing trades. Philadelphia trades for John Mechie and sends Harrison Bryant, a tight end, to Houston because they lost Brevin Jordan for the year. You have a New Orleans and Jacksonville player for player swap, or Luke Fortner gets traded for Colin Saunders. It's teams now have the opportunity to get out in front of the cuts. Hey, we have some decisions. Hey, we have some lingering players that were a part of a different regime that aren't a part of the long-term picture that we have. Can we get something for them to help us now? And that's where, if I were Chris Grier, we're going to finish today's episode on this very topic. And I wrote for this for A to Z Sports and gave a couple names. You start making these phone calls now. You start working the phone calls now. And push comes to shove, you see who shakes loose on waivers, but I guarantee you, you're not going to find a lot of attractive options on waivers because there's no such thing as too many good corners. There's not a lot of teams that are going to have corner surplus and be willing to let it go unless they get something back that can help their team. And that's where I think the Dolphins are probably better served. Now, there's some free agents that are still out there. Asante Samuel Jr., what's his medical status? Stephon Gilmore, does he really want to play? I know he said he wanted to play, but how ready are you to make a commitment and play somewhere? What are you prepared to play for? Rasul Douglas was tied to the Dolphins forever. That hasn't happened. I would assume that the ship has sailed in that regard. But just because we have Matthew Judon in on a visit, I don't think means you should assume that they are resting on their laurels. Now, if we get past roster cuts next week and we get to Thursday, if we get 10 days from now and the corner room hasn't changed, we're going to dance with what brought us here. And we're going to see how that goes. And I would not like the entirety of that story if that's how it's going to play out, but we'll see, right? So speaking of corners on the move and free agency, week 1 just got a little bit more interesting. We're getting into that next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything. Cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serving more than 5 million people. It's easy to fit in your schedule. Just click to connect, and you can even switch therapists at any time you need. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Xavien Howard, happy trails. Wish you best. Xavien Howard signing with the Indianapolis Colts today per his agent, David Cantor, on a 1-year deal worth up to $5 million. And I would challenge any Dolphins fan who's upset or disappointed by this turn of events to look at this through a couple of different lenses. A, are you excited about the addition of Darren Waller to the tight end room? And if the answer is no, because he didn't play last year, then congruency's sake would say we're probably not going to be too disappointed that Xavien Howard signed with the Colts. as a 32-year-old corner who couldn't run with DeAndre Hopkins at the end of the year in 2023, trying to cover him downfield in the collapse against the Titans. Here's the other piece of this puzzle, too. And we've mentioned 32 years old, right? He's a 32-year-old corner who did not play last year, Xavien Howard. You remove the nostalgia of 29 interceptions, which is tied for fourth all-time in franchise history. I mean, he's one of the best ball hawks in franchise history. There's no question there. But the Dolphins this offseason said, hey, we want to get younger and we want less distractions. And I don't think 32-year-old Xavien Howard, who was last in the headlines for some really egregious, unsavory headlines for things off the field, and I'll just leave it at that, as a family-friendly program, doesn't really feel like the 2 + 2 = 4 that falls in line with everything else the Dolphins have done this offseason. And I understand, like, there's no roster in the NFL that's made and comprised completely of Boy Scouts, right? And I get that. And Jack Jones being a player in the cornerback room that the Dolphins have brought in, who has had trouble and worn out welcome in more than one stop. So I get it, but you don't want too many of them, and you don't want the risk. And Howard, down the stretch in 22 and 23, was banged up, right? He got hurt against Baltimore, and the Baltimore loss in week 17 in 2023. Week 17 is never kind to the Dolphins, it seems like. And now he's 2 years older than that, going to be 30, or he is 32, his age 32 season. I'm not losing any sleep over. And from my perspective, like, yes, there's familiarity with Xavien Howard and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and they practice together a whole bunch. But if I'm watching Howard struggle to stay connected to DeAndre Hopkins in the year 2023 down the field, do I think he's going to run well enough to run with Tyreek Hill / Jalen Waddle? No, maybe he can play physical and play at the line of scrimmage, and maybe the time off will have helped his legs and get some bounce back in his legs. Remains to be seen. But I didn't see Xavien Howard as a viable option or answer for the ailments that the Dolphins cornerback room has when you look at it through the lens of what have they tried to do this offseason? What were their objectives? What are they hoping to achieve? Who are they trying to be? Howard didn't really align with a lot of it as far as I was concerned. So that's where I check in on the Xavien Howard thing. But it is obviously, there's a storyline here. There's a story to go with. Howard played, he was drafted in the second round in 2016. He's never played for another team but the Dolphins. He was off all year last year. The Dolphins had a few $1 million that was guaranteed to him as a portion of his salary that was it converted to fully guaranteed. So they had to pay it out. And they said, well, we hope he signs with somebody else and it's offset money. And he can just, we'll get the kickback on whatever he signs with somebody else to play. Well, he didn't play all year. So he sat at home and had the separation from the guarantees that were a part of his 2024 salary that was fully guaranteed. And he got paid that. Now he's ready to play. And he will play against the Dolphins in his first game. And it'll be really fun to kind of see how ready he is. And I think there's a pretty good chance Howard plays. He's reunited with Lou Anarumo, who was his position coach when he first came in with the Dolphins. And Anarumo, I believe the Bengals had him in for a visit last year, and he didn't sign. Well, Anarumo is now in Indianapolis. And it feels like Anarumo has been trying to get a reunion for quite some time, and he finally gets it, and that means the Dolphins are going to have to play Xavien Howard in week 1. I'm sure the timeline will be totally rational and not overreactive to whatever happens, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, with Xavien Howard and the Colts against the Dolphins in week 1. But as if you didn't need any more juice to get geared up for week 1 of this season, you've now got the Xavien Howard revenge game element in your back pocket as well. So the Dolphins will not be leaning on Xavien Howard to answer their cornerback situation, but they do have some other opportunities to make some phone calls across the league. We're going to get into that next. The first 5 phone calls I would be making if my name is Chris Grier. We're going to get into that next here on Locked On Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here. It means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience unlike any before. Locked On Dolphins this year is playing on Yahoo Fantasy. And you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your 1 millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over the course of 28 days in August. To kick it off, they dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play Yahoo Fantasy where the lowest scoring team each week gets eliminated until there's just one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. If my name were Chris Grier, and it's not, I would like to make sure everybody knows, because I would not be a very popular person on this platform if my name was Chris Grier, based off the comments and the tweets about Chris Grier. But if my name were Chris Grier, here's 5 teams I'd be calling, about 5 veterans across the league, and why I think they could make some sense for the Dolphins and why these teams might be willing to part with these players. I'd call the Baltimore Ravens. You go back to the start of free agency, and Baltimore signs veteran corner Chidobe Awuzie. He most recently was in Tennessee. Before that, he was in Cincinnati, was a good player. Later stage, late chapter player, but good football instincts. He's a year further removed from what was a serious injury. And Baltimore signed him to a 1-year deal before Jair Alexander shook loose. And then Baltimore, with the connection between Lamar Jackson and Jair Alexander, signs Alexander on a discount. And now their starting secondary is Alexander, Marlon Humphrey, 2024 first-round draft pick Nate Wiggins, and then in the safety room, they have Malachi Starks and Kyle Hamilton. It's a good group. They also have Jalen Armour Davis, who's in the last year of a rookie contract, who's played meaningful football for them. They have a former 4th-round draft choice in TJ Tampa, and they have Keon Martin, who's an undrafted rookie this year, and in the slot, who's making a big-time push to make the roster. Like, we got bodies to work with here. You got to back up. I mean, you can make an argument, Chidobe Awuzie. I think he would be in front of Armour Davis, and I think he'd be in front of TJ Tampa. But like, for Baltimore, from a long-term scope, and you have the veterans in front of them as the starters, like, I might want TJ Tampa and Jalen Armour Davis to be the backups in the event that they need to play, because there's some more long-term appeal with those players. Nobody loves drafting in the late rounds like Eric DeCosta. So if you told me, hey, you signed this guy in March, but then another player became available that you signed because you thought it was too good to be true, you can cash out of that first player that you signed and get an asset for him with it's a late round pick for an older corner, but nevertheless, it's still a late round pick. Would they bite? I'd be inclined to think that there'd be some interest there. So Chidobe Awuzie with Baltimore is a name that I would absolutely call on. Kansas City with Joshua Williams, who's in the last year of his rookie contract. They obviously have Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, and then they drafted Noel Williams in the 3rd round of this year's draft, who's got some good early reviews. And for Kansas City, it's like, well, are you going to pay Joshua Williams to be your backup perimeter corner, your 4th outside corner, or your 3rd outside corner if you're going to play Trent McDuffie inside? Probably not. You have a replacement plan in place. Here's a cash out opportunity to get somebody off the books that's owed a couple $1 million. We're paying Trey Smith big time money. We're paying Creed Humphrey big time money. Pat Mahomes getting big time money. George Karlaftis is getting big time money. Chris Jones is getting big time money. You can go up and down the roster, and there's handsomely compensated players. So From a business perspective, cashing out a year early for a player who's not necessarily projected to start for you is kind of the entire thesis of the kinds of players you're looking for, is if you're going to be opportunistic as the Dolphins. So I'd call Kansas City as well. Jacoby Durant with the Rams. This was that they played like a little bit of a game with Darian Kendrick, who's going to the last year of his deal, and they cut him and then they signed him back. It's a pretty busy cornerback room. It just doesn't have like the top of depth chart name, in my opinion, where Durant is listed as a co-starter with Ahkello Witherspoon at one cornerback spot. He's in the last year of his rookie contract. The Rams have Quentin Lake in the nickel, so it's a little bit more of a big nickel type look for them. They have Emmanuel Forbes as insurance. They've got Darren Kendrick, who they brought back. Durant's probably the most expensive because I think the projection is it's probably the best player that we've mentioned thus far as what he would be in Miami. What are you willing to do? I mean, the Rams have 2 first-round picks next year already. They've got big expectations this year. Matthew Stafford just came back to practice today. What's the asking price there? But if they like Ahkello Witherspoon enough to view it as a half in, half out, and they're getting ready. I mean, they just paid Kyron Williams. They're paying their interior offensive lineman. They just paid their left tackle. They've got a really good young nucleus of defensive linemen that they're going to have to start getting ready to pay. They got to get ready to pay Puka Nacua. Stafford's just got the contract adjustment to this year, and he's under contract for next year. Like, are you going to bring back Jacoby Durant? And if the answer is no, and you view Ahkello Witherspoon as a comparable asset, would you consider making some kind of swap? That's what I would be calling and trying to figure out if I were the Dolphins. Philadelphia, who Miami has done business with in the past, Adoree Jackson is somebody who's pretty similar to Chidobe Awuzie, where he signed at the beginning of the free agent period. Cooper DeJean and Quinion Mitchell can both play outside. DeJean, when they go 3, is in the slot. They traded for Jacorian Bennett from the Raiders this offseason already. So Jackson, and then they have Keely Ringo as well. So they're not super deep, but the addition of Jacorian Bennett, I think, really changes that for them. And Adoree Jackson's on a 1-year deal for what's equivalent to vet minimum plus the signing bonus that the Dolphins wouldn't have to onboard. So it's a very easily accessible contract, just like Chidobe Awuzie. It's another name. Hey, Howie, opportunistic. I know you already traded for Jacorian Bennett, so you got a little bit more corner depth than maybe you thought that you would. You signed this guy in March. Would you like a pick for him? Make the offer. And then that brings you to your last one, who's that much more available now with the Xavien Howard development. But maybe it would be a tricky one for week 1 because of the timing and the fact that you play this team week 1 at the Colts. It's Juju Brents, Julius Brents from Kansas State. It was a day 2 draft choice a couple years ago. Really good film. It's kind of the same song and dance as Cam Smith, where it's just like you're at the point where you'd probably be better served with a fresh start somewhere else. I think he's dealing with a hamstring thing right now. It's not the proven answer that you'd be getting with any of the other 4 names of an Adoree Jackson or a Kobe Durant or a Joshua Williams or a Chidobe Awuzie. Like, those guys have all played more. They're much better proof of concept NFL players. But maybe there's a buy low opportunity with Brents, and maybe you feel like you have enough get by with some of your other vets that you can make it work. Those are 5 guys I'd be calling on if I was Chris Grier. We'll see if anything comes. But right now, we are on Matthew Judon watch. We'll see if he signs. I'm sure by the time I get this published, it'll be about 3:40, 3:30. So within 30 minutes of it getting published, if there's any transactions today, we'll find out. And we'll be sure to follow it up tomorrow with whatever comes our way. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out here. Go Fins.